Hello, Chevra. Welcome back to Opining on Olam Haba. It is heating up, literally and figuratively, right? We left off the title of the last, I don't want to call it a lecture, the last mini shir was try explaining fire to a fish. And it reminded me of the verse I was thinking about from The Little Mermaid, if you remember such a movie. The Little Mermaid, where she said, "What is a fire and how does it, what's that word, burn?" Thank you, that's my best Ariel, right? What's a fire and how does it burn, right? Because she lives in water. So again, the same thing for us. That's the idea being that, we are living in water, we're in a different dimension. And we're trying to understand something completely spiritual when we are completely physical beings living in physical worlds. Okay, so we're picking up, again, chapter 10. It says 10:1, but we're up to stanza 15, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, about 20 lines into this stanza. The end of the line, there's a period, he's basically saying that the greatest pleasure, the greatest delight, the spiritual pleasure and delight, and this is very Rambam-esque, is masigin ba'amitat habore yitbarach. It's comprehending, thinking about, and pondering, and comprehending, and not just comprehending, but experiencing and understanding the truth of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So, Haim b'ta'anug t'midi. This is an eternal, a never-ending, unceasing ta'anug, right? Hashem, in Kabbalistic literature, is called the Ein Sof, the without end, the never-ending, right? Like the never-ending story, right? The Ein Sof, the without end, right? But God is not only Ein Sof, we say Beli Reshit, Beli Tachlit. Not only is he without an end, he's also without a beginning, right? It's always. So this kind of pleasure is not momentary, like as I finish up my little soup here. Tastes good for the moment, but then it goes away. Spiritual ta'anug is not fleeting, right? By definition, it's not transient, it's eternal. Heim b'ta'anug t'midi she'eno nifsak ve'ein ta'anug gufni etzlam. So these beings, the angels, the stars, right? The celestial beings, right? They have a ta'anug, a different type of ta'anug. There is no physical sensation. There is no physical pleasure or delight in their lexicon of feelings, of emotions, whatever that means. Ve'ena masigin oto lefi she'en lahem chushim kamonu. They don't have our senses. They don't have eyes and ears and mouths and noses, right? So the spiritual, right? Unlike, think about, you can think about what the Rambam is, talking about. I mean, if you comparing it to, quote, the gods of, Greek mythology, perhaps, right? That, they did this and they enjoy this and they sleep around. That doesn't exist. That's not the spiritual beings that we believe in. They don't have any physical characteristics or any senses, comparable to what we have. She'asigu bahem, ma she'anu masigin oto, so that they can comprehend or appreciate and experience the kinds of things that we do. The same thing for us. Kishi, again, we're in a different dimension, right? We're in the water, they're in the air, right? Different dimensions. Kishi yizdakech mimenu, mi sheyizdakech v'yaleh la'otam ma'aleh achar moto. When we purify ourselves and we become more in tune and in touch with the spiritual world, and especially after 120, we transition into the spiritual world. Achar moto, eino masig ta'anugi magufnim. We can't possibly experience or even appreciate physical, material pleasures. They don't exist in that world. And they don't exist within us, right? Because we're spiritual at that point. We're all soul. Ve'eino rotze behem ela ke'ein sheyirtze hamelech shu gadol hamemshala sheyipashet mimalchuto umemshalto v'yachzor l'sachek ima ne'arim bakadur k'shaya osa lifnim min hamalchut. וזה בקטנות שניו כשלא היה מבחין בין מעלת שני העניינים, כמו שאנחנו היום משבחים ומנסים תענוגי הגוף ולא תענוגי הנפש. He compares it to a king and someone who's experienced, the goodness of the king. That here I'll read it for you here. It's similar to if a king who's the top of the government would divest himself of his kingdom and his government and go back to playing ball with children. And you have a king, right, who's living in the castle, living in the palace, living a life that's completely in a different dimension. And he'd go back to playing ball with kids like he used to do before his kingdom. Since that was in his being small of years, when he didn't distinguish between the worth of these two things, just as we today praise and elevate the physical pleasures and not the spiritual ones. Meaning, we don't know what we're missing, right? There's nothing greater for a little kid than, right? I mean, the spring is coming, right? There's nothing better than, the smell of a freshly cut grass and a mitt, and the leather of a mitt and think of whatever you are, right? But once you taste the taste of, majesty, right? You're in the upper echelons of the palace, the government, or you're in the real world. You don't get excited about those toys anymore. Remember the movie Big? Sorry, I'm throwing movies out. Remember the movie Big, right? Where Tom Hanks is a little boy, right? And then all of a sudden he starts growing up and he has grown-up things to worry about, and his best friend, doesn't understand what happened to, right? We know that's the way things go. We recognize that. So the Rambam continues, and he says now think about that for a second, right? You don't go back. Once you've tasted it, you don't go back. So if you're in heaven, right, you're experiencing spiritual delight, you're not going to say, I want to go back and have the physical. When you think about these two types of tanugim, playing ball and the being up in upper management or the king or government or whatever, you realize how much lowlier one thing is than the other. Playing ball is great, but again, we understand, right? Life isn't just fun and games. There are more exciting and important things for our lives. He says you find this in this world as well. You have people who will work, to the nth degree, to go above and beyond, so that people can recognize them, so that they can achieve a sense of power and prestige and honor in this world. And people will look to them and praise them and put them up, and see them in a certain kind of way. This is not like, the hana, they're both pleasures, right? But this is not like the pleasure of eating and drinking. Yeah, it's nice to have a nice meal, but seriously, to experience, again, like the Rambam saying, power and prestige, we look at it in a whole different way. He says, and this is the Rambam speaking before the Godfather, 1,000 years, right? Clearly there were people like that too in his day, that choose to live their lives dedicated to taking vengeance on their enemies or plotting how to take down their enemies. Yoter meheseg harbi tanugei aguf. More so than running after all of the other pleasures of this world, right? Think about, again, I'm in a movie mood, right? You think about like Fredo, who lives his life. They send him to Vegas, and he's got the lap of luxury, and he's got money, and he has, he's a philanderer, and he's living this life of a playboy and whatever. But he's not serious. Who's serious? Michael's serious. What's he doing? He's plotting to take down the enemies, right? Because you realize there's a difference in these in these material or this worldly pleasures. And many people, really try to get away from all of these, being seen as a carouser, or a hedonist, right? That's just into eating and drinking and this and that, whatever. People are going to look at him funny. People are going to say, oh yeah, that's that guy. Look at him. Look at the way he eats. Look at the way he's not a serious man. Or a serious person or a serious woman. And if this is the way in the physical world, how much more so in the spiritual world, right? He wants to have a good name for himself. And that is the next world. Shenafshotenu maskilot sham, miyadiat habori yisbarach, where a place where our souls are able to comprehend the full knowledge of God. Kamoshe maskilot hagufnim ha'elyonim, right? And we want to be a part of whatever, right? Just like if you want honor, certain people might want to be the hedonist, the player next to that person. It's like, oh wow, it's amazing. How much more so to really want to understand God? Wow. O yoter ve'oto tanug lo yichalek lechalakim v'lo yisupar v'lo yimtza mashalim sholbo oto. And you can't like divide this up and understand this delight or this pleasure. And you can't give a metaphor, try to give a parable to explain it. Ela kamosha amar hanavi. It's like the Navi said, the prophet said, Kishe nifla'u be'enav gedulad hatov hahu ma'alato. Amar ma rav tuvcha shertzafanta lirecha. When you see how amazing, you see something wondrous to your eyes, you can't really describe it. You say, how incredible, ma rav tuvcha, how incredible is the good that you've stored up for those who fear you. As it says in the Gemara Brachos, the next world doesn't have eating or drinking, not bathing and not anointing, and no physical intimacy. Rather, the righteous are sitting there with crowns on their heads, and they're just basking in the light of the divine presence. What does it mean they're wearing crowns? Hasha'aros hanefesh b'kiyum hamuskal lehem v'hu aboris barach v'heyos hu rotzel lomar hamuskal v'hu davar echad k'mo shezechruhu gedolei filosofim b'drachim ya'arech be'uram bekan. Says, you know what the crowns are? The crowns are things you've achieved, the spiritual comprehension, the spiritual gifts, attainments that you've achieved in this world. They sit with you there in the next world, and you're able to bask in the glory of the divine presence. That is true, infinite, eternal, spiritual delight. We'll talk more about this and how to possibly understand it, even though there's no way to understand it. Emir Hashem, next time. Have a great one.